You know, there's something about a steam locomotive that feels almost alive. It breathes, it groans, it has a heartbeat. But for over half a century, one of the greatest mechanical titans ever conceived by human hands sat perfectly still. It was a 600-ton ghost baking under the California sun, a silent witness to a bygone era. This is the story of the Union Pacific 4014, the Big Boy. It's not just a story about gears, bolts, and pistons. It's a story about a nation at a crossroads, a desperate war, and a group of modern-day dreamers who decided that impossible was just a starting point. We're going to look at how this iron giant was brought back from the dead to become a living, breathing ambassador of the American spirit. Part 1. Born of Necessity. To understand why the 4014 matters, we have to go back to the early 1940s. The world was on fire. America was shifting from the dark days of the Great Depression into the frantic, high-stakes production of World War II. Logistics wasn't just a business term back then, it was the heartbeat of the war effort. The Union Pacific Railroad had a massive problem: the Wasatch Mountains. This rugged stretch of terrain in Utah was a bottleneck. Standard engines just couldn't hack it. They needed a locomotive that could pull a 3,600-ton freight train. That's roughly the weight of 1,800 cars, over steep mountain grades without needing helper engines to push from behind. The American Locomotive Company, ALCO, answered the call with the Big Boy. Imagine a machine 132 feet long, longer than 2 city buses parked end to end, weighing 1.2 million pounds. They used a unique 4884 wheel arrangement. It was an articulated design, meaning the engine was actually hinged in the middle. This allowed this massive steel spine to snake through mountain curves that would have snapped a rigid frame like a toothpick. Number 4014 was delivered in December 1941, right as the U.S. entered the war. For 20 years, it was the king of the rails. But by the late 50s, the world had changed. Diesel-electric engines were cheaper and easier to maintain. In 1961, after over 1 million miles of service, 4014 was retired to a museum in Pomona, California. It was assumed that its fires had been extinguished for the last time. Part 2. The Audacious Dream. For 50 years, the idea of restoring a Big Boy was considered a pipe dream. It was too big, too expensive, and the expertise to fix it was dying out. But in 2013, the leadership at Union Pacific did something unthinkable. They decided to bring the 4014 home. The goal? To have it operational for the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad. This wasn't a PR stunt. They wanted a living ambassador. In our world of fiber optics and invisible automation, they wanted people to stand next to something they could feel in their chest, the raw, physical power that actually built the modern world. Part 3. The 1,300-mile crawl. Before the team could even think about fixing the engine, they had to get it from California to the steam shop in Cheyenne, Wyoming. That's a 1,390-mile trip. Remember, this thing hadn't moved in 52 years. The bearings were dry as bone. The joints were seized. It wasn't even connected to the modern rail grid. In 2014, a crews had to lay temporary track across a parking lot just to get it to the main line. The move became a national event. People lined the tracks for miles. You had grandfathers bringing their grandkids, pointing at the rust and saying, "I used to hear that whistle when I was your age." It wasn't just a transport, it was a parade of nostalgia. Despite a derailed tender truck and constant mechanical hiccups, the giant finally rolled into the Cheyenne steam shop. Part 4. The Industrial Cathedral. The Cheyenne steam shop is a holy place for rail fans, but it wasn't ready for a Big Boy. The team had to perform a restoration of the restoration site. They tore down false ceilings because the engine was too tall. They reinforced the floors and installed a 40-ton overhead crane just to move the parts. It became what people called an industrial cathedral. Inside, you had a tiny elite team of mechanics and boilermakers who were about to spend the next 5 years deconstructing and rebuilding a legend, one steel plate at a time. Part 5. The Heart and the Bones. The restoration was a brutal mix of high-tech science and old-school sweat. The boiler, a test of will. The boiler is the heart of the machine. Inside the 4014's boiler were 500 stay bolts, heavy steel rods that anchor the firebox to the outer shell so the whole thing doesn't explode under pressure. Every single one had to be drilled out and replaced by hand. It was back-breaking filthy work. They used modern steel, sure, but the technique was the same one used in the 1940s. The springs, solving a dead end. Then there were the leaf springs. After 50 years of sitting still, the original steel was brittle. If they tried to run the engine on them, they'd shatter. But here's the problem. You can't buy big boy parts at a hardware store. Union Pacific's metallurgist, Dr. Robert Clean, had to go into the archives and find the original Alco blueprints. He chose a modern alloy called SAE 5160, the kind of stuff used in heavy-duty truck springs today. But since the original machines to make these springs were long gone, the team had to build their own custom dies and furnaces. Each spring was hand-forged and then tested under $18,000 pounds of pressure. This wasn't just repair, it was bespoke engineering at its finest. Part 6. Adapting for the future. The team made one big change to the original design. They converted 4014 from coal to oil. Back in the day, a big boy would eat 22 tons of coal on a single trip. But coal is a nightmare in the 21st century. It's dirty, it throws sparks that start forest fires, and it requires a massive logistics chain just to get it to the engine. By converting it to burn No. 5 fuel oil, they made the engine cleaner and gave the crew much more control over the fire. It made the old dog capable of learning new tricks on a modern rail network. Part 7. The Breath of Life. February 6, 2019. This was the moment of truth. The hydrostatic test. They filled the boiler with water and cranked the pressure up to 375 pounds per square inch, way higher than it would ever need to go in actual operation. The shop went dead silent. Everyone was looking for a leak, a crack, a hiss. When the gauges held steady, the team knew they had a winner. 2 months later, they lit the fire. As the oil burner roared to life, the cold steel began to expand. The engine started to groan and pop. To the engineers, it sounded like the machine was finally waking up from a 58-year nap. For the first time in over half a century, the 4014 was breathing. Part 8. The Return of the King. On May 1, 2019, under the cover of a Wyoming night, 4014 moved under its own power. It was like seeing a ghost walk. A few days later, it made its public debut, heading to Ogden, Utah for the Great Race. The climax was something out of a movie. The 4014 met the 844, another legendary UP steam engine, face-to-face. As they touched pilots and let out a synchronized blast of their whistles, the sound didn't just bounce off the mountains, it seemed to echo through time. Tens of thousands of people stood there in awe. It proved that our fascination with steam power isn't just a hobby, it's a deep, DNA-level connection to our own history. Part 9. The Legacy. So, why spend millions of dollars and 5 years fixing an obsolete machine? First, it's an educational bridge. It shows the iPhone generation that innovation didn't start in a Silicon Valley garage. It started in soot-covered factories with hammers and heat. Second, it's a proof of concept. It shows that we don't have to throw away our past to build a future. By using modern metallurgy and fuel systems, the 4014 is actually a better, safer machine today than it was when it rolled off the assembly line in 1941. And finally, it's about pride. It's a 600-ton reminder of what we can do when we decide that something is worth saving. Conclusion. The roar continues today. The Big Boy 4014 is a rolling museum. It travels the country, a symphony of steam and steel that stops traffic in every town it passes. It's no longer just a relic or a museum piece, it's a living icon. It stands as a testament to the fact that if you have enough faith, enough engineering skill, and a little bit of grease under your fingernails, even the dead can be made to roar again. Next time you hear a train whistle in the distance, think of the 4014. Think of the 600-ton giant that refused to stay retired. Because as long as this engine is on the rails, the spirit of American innovation isn't just a memory, it's a moving, breathing reality.